Good morning, welcome to Headline Focus, here live on Core Politics with me, Rob Double. It is Monday, the 29th of October 2018. Let's have a look at what's making the political headlines now. This week there is one big event in terms of the political agenda, and that is, of course, the budget happening today. Philip Hammond, the Chancellor, due to be in the Commons on his feet at around about 3:30 p.m. Now, you'll see in the newspapers, you'll see in the, you probably have seen over the weekend, you've seen online as well, all of these different rumours about what's going to be in the budget, what the commitments are going to be, what's going to be spent in terms of departments and on what projects. The reality is no one knows exactly what's going to happen apart from the Chancellor and his immediate team, and we will not find out until 3:30 or at least 3:30 today when he gets up and talks through the budget. So take everything you see with a little bit of a pinch of salt. There are a few lines which we'll run through, but that as a broad brush thing is the budget for obvious reasons has remained pretty confidential before the event. So everything you see is really rumours at this point. Now, the big headlines, though, one of the things he did when he went on the Sunday interviews yesterday emphasise was that there will be a new budget in the event of a no-deal Brexit. Now, he said this on the Andrew Marr show. He was also on the Sophie Ridge on Sunday show as well, saying in the extremely unlikely situation of a no-deal exit from the EU, the government would be required to take a different approach to economic policy. Now, in the event of a no deal, frankly, we'd need to have a new budget that set out a new strategy for the future. Now, what does that mean? Well, for some, particularly those who are in the city, those who look at the budget as a real indication of what the government's doing and look at it for some certainty over what the economic policy of the government is, this isn't going to be that good news. Because if you think about it, if you're reliant upon knowing what the government of the day is going to be doing in terms of the economy, no one likes to know, well, this is what we're planning today, but it could be possible then in a few months' time, if there's a no-deal Brexit, there'll be a whole new budget with a whole new set of policies. And therefore, in terms of planning or making commitments, businesses and people involved in the city in particular might be putting that off until they find out whether it's going to be a no-deal Brexit or not, or whether there's going to be a deal and what that deal is going to entail. So as you can see here, there is an element of uncertainty in this budget, which is unlike perhaps others previous to it, you know, nature of the circumstance we're in terms of the political situation. But in terms of what's going to be happening, this is a sort of for the moment budget until we find out what the final Brexit deal is going to be. In terms of anti-austerity, that key message from Theresa May, the Prime Minister, on her conference speech in September, in terms of when she came up, she said, "This is, austerity is over. It's been happening for years and years and years. I'm going to bring a change to that." There is reportedly some pressure between the Chancellor and the Prime Minister of how far this austerity is going to go. Philip Hammond making the case for there still needs to be sound economic planning, and there needs to be sound economic management as well in terms of consistency, but also voters will not like trying to be bought over by policies. But it'll be very interesting to see how far that goes and to the extent of spending as well, and spending commitments. One report that is coming through is obviously the £20 billion annual funding boost for the NHS. That's one of the key pivotal bits of the budget today. An aspect of that which has come through, and in many reports, as you can see here, is that this will include a £2 billion real terms increase in mental health funding. Now, Philip Hammond has got to find this money somewhere. He's had a £13 billion tax bill, don't forget. That came out last week, I think. He's got an extra £13 billion to play with. A lot of that will be soaked up by this NHS commitment. So where he's going to find this extra spending, if he makes those further spending commitments, will be the real meat on the bones of this budget. Whether it's going to come from taxes, whether it's going to come from borrowing. Obviously, a number of Conservative MPs on the backbench is very, very keen to know the details, and no doubt will be critical if it's not going the way they feel the economy should be managed. Also, in a sort of more sombre aspect, is this Philip Hammond's last budget? Now, there is reports that some people, in fact, there's a consensus perhaps in Westminster that this could be the Prime Minister's last budget and indeed the Chancellor's last budget, because post-Brexit, Theresa May will be invited to step down, having fulfilled the Brexit process, and with a new Prime Minister could be a new Chancellor as well. So something to think about. It could be Philip Hammond's last time at the dispatch box as Chancellor. One more story, next story coming up, MPs killer second referendum. Now, this is to do with what's going to be going through in the Commons in terms of Brexit legislation. A cross-party group of MPs have launched a campaign led by Conservative MP Sarah Wollaston, who's right here, attempting to force a second EU referendum. Now, how are they doing this? Not through protests, not through mass movements and public outside of Westminster, but actually from the inside, tabling what's been reported as a killer amendment or killer amendments to the Brexit deal when it arrives in the Commons. Now, this is important because if MPs are allowed to attach amendments to the legislation on Brexit coming through. They could attach things like a second referendum onto it, and if they have the support in Parliament, that could be added in as a successful amendment to the Brexit legislation, which would mean that the Brexit legislation would not be enacted until a second referendum, or whatever the terms of the amendment says, is achieved. It will make it part of all the Brexit legislation going through. Really important aspect, and particularly in the context of the group saying they believe, according to these reports, they have the support of over 100 MPs, but there's a caveat to this, that many MPs also believe that they will only succeed if Jeremy Corbyn and the Labour Party bring their weight behind the amendments and bring the Labour Party behind the amendments as well. So there is an element now of pressure on Jeremy Corbyn and the Labour Party to either back or not back this amendment. That will be a key component as to whether a second referendum would actually take place, put through by amendments inside Westminster. Really, really important story as well. Final story, one more coming again on Brexit, this one from the FT. UK has managed to roll over only 14 of the 236 international treaties that the EU has signed with countries around the world. Now, when we say roll over, what we basically mean is successfully copied the treaties, the agreements have successfully been copied by the UK into basically mini arrangements between the UK and the respective countries. And that way, that all the agreements that the UK has been part of through the membership of being part of the EU will still continue post-Brexit, regardless of the circumstances, because those individual arrangements have been agreed with those respective countries. Now, the fact that only 14 of the 236 have been achieved so far adds to the concern, according to the FT, that there will be significant disruption if Britain crashes out of the EU without a deal, because there will be dislodging and discontinuing of a lot of those treaties because of the lack of membership of being part of the EU. For example, needs to roll over 40 free trade agreements with the EU has with countries including Canada, Japan, South Korea, and Mexico. Now, one of the aspects which was interesting covered in this article as well is what could be the reason for why these treaties, why these negotiations could be taking longer. Well, there is perhaps a possibility that each of these individual countries, when the UK comes forward and says we'd like to replicate this agreement with you directly, for a similar relation to what we had as part of the EU, we want it to come and be the same, and now we're outside the EU, those countries could say, well, yes, but this is an opportunity for us to renegotiate and reopen those treaties in this mini agreement we're going to have with you so that we can have it to our best advantage and perhaps leverage as much benefit in terms of the deal from the UK as well, which could mean that the treaties themselves, the mini agreements, could be less beneficial to the UK as a result, which obviously would be lacking, not as beneficial for the UK in the long run. Quite an interesting story, no doubt, as the no deal concerns ramp up, and as we get nearer to that deadline of what's going to be happening in terms of a Brexit agreement, these kind of issues will be coming to the forefront in terms of have the UK managed to successfully plan for the possibility, at least, that there could be a hard Brexit or there could be a no-deal scenario, just as much as there could be a successful deal agreed by the government and the EU. That's pretty much it to start the week. You're up to date. Don't forget you can find all the latest on what we're doing here on our Facebook page and Twitter there. But from me and all the team here at Core London, I'll be back again on Wednesday, no doubt, to be going through what happened in the budget and the fallout from them. See you then.